Okay, the next section we're going to look at on FreeAgent is called the Contacts tab. So up here, there's a big blue tab called Contacts, and when you click into it, you will load this page here, which basically shows you this is the contacts for your customers and suppliers and all that kind of stuff. So generally speaking, for contractors, the easiest thing to do in here is to add a new contact, and this will usually be your agency or your client. So you can add the organization name into here. If you're sending invoice to a particular person, you can put their name as well. Then you want to enter in the billing email address for that company and their address as well for the invoice. So these details will show up on any invoices you make. Let's say I'm going to invoice Apple for something. I am providing software services for Apple. So we're going to enter in Apple's details into here. I'm going to leave the address blank because it's not going to be a real invoice, but you would essentially fill out this address details box if you can with the client's details. So normally I don't use any of these things here. There's no need. VAT registration number, if you are VAT registered, will be automatically added for you, which will sort that out, so don't worry about that. And just create a new contact. And there we have it. We've made a new contact that we can now create invoices for, or we can create bills for. So there's two different ways to do this. The first one is invoicing, and we'll go into that first, okay? So in the Work tab, there is an invoicing section here. I will get into explaining these other tabs in a second, but for now we'll stick to invoices. So if we click on invoice, we will need to create our first invoice, and here you'll have the contact appear, and it's currently selected as Apple. That's our only contact in the software, and that's what we need to focus on. So the project tab only applies if you are actually working on multiple projects for the same client and you want to separate your transactions from those. So for example, you've got 2 projects running for Apple and you have 2 sets of expenses for each project that you want to track, and you want to look at how much money each project is making. In that case, it would be wise to set up a project, but for most people, if you're just doing one client at a time and there aren't multiple projects for each client, then you can just invoice them as you go. You don't have to set up projects for everyone. And then we have the invoice reference, which is simply the invoice number. You can start off with 001. You can also start off with your own reference and then numerically go up from there. And it will automatically create the sequencing for you once you start adding these in. So invoice date is the point that you want to actually invoice the customer for. And usually it's on the day you create the invoice, but that's totally up to you. You can select a different day if you so choose to, but whatever makes the most sense in terms of like what services you're providing. Payment terms are again agreed upon between you and the client or agency. So if you have 7-day invoice terms or you've got 30 days invoice terms, just enter that number into here. Currency. FreeAgent has quite a few currency options for you to choose, but for most people, pound sterling is absolutely fine. And additional text, if you needed to add something extra into the invoice that is not going to be invoiced, but you just wanted some like a comment or a note on the invoice, then you can put it into here. But most people don't use that at all. And invoice emails here. So if you create invoice templates or reminders or thank you emails or anything like that, then you can select those options here in when you're creating your first invoice. In the more options section, you have some other things to choose from here, such as an invoice discount. If you needed a custom contact name or something that will override the default contact details, you can enter into here. Same with payment terms. If you need a PO reference, you can put it in there. You can select bank account details that show up on your invoice. So we'll add these into FreeAgent, and then when you create invoices, it'll automatically pop up with your bank account number and sort code to make sure your clients can pay you. And then you've got a few extra customization options and also the BIC and IBAN numbers if you need that. So when you're done customizing your basic information for your invoice, you can click on Create New Invoice. And now it will take you to a page where you can actually enter in the specific details of your invoice, so what you're invoicing for and how much for. Now, when you first set up a company, there will be a pending VAT registration if you need to register for VAT. This means that we're either waiting on details to register you for VAT, or we've submitted the application but haven't received the VAT number just yet. So in this stage, it'll show up a note on your invoice that it's been applied for, so the customer can know that this invoice will likely have a VAT charge on it once the company is registered. And what we'll do is help you create a backdated invoice with the VAT amount that should have been added onto your first invoice. I know it sounds a little bit confusing right now, but we will help you with this, so don't worry. When you want to add a service or a product onto your invoice, simply click on the green button called Add Invoice Item. And this will come up with a pop-up box with a quantity section. And in here you can put in the number of, and then whatever applies best to what you're doing. So for example, if you're providing a specific service, you would want to pick services. If you're providing training, then you'd want to put in a training. If you wanted to invoice in hours or days, then you would select those options. So basically just make sure you're creating the correct quantity of whatever you're doing. So let's say we're invoicing days and we want to do 5 days of something. So you have to put something in the details box. So let's say software development. Okay, so I just put a generic details in there. Normally you would put some extra stuff like what you actually physically worked on if you're working on a project to check off some boxes of what was completed. And then we want to put the unit price in. So let's say I am getting paid £400 per day. The final step is the VAT amount. So what you would normally do when you're VAT registered is just add the standard 20%. So what FreeAgent will do is increase your price by 20% to account for the VAT, but it won't show as an additional VAT charge, which means quite a few clients won't necessarily be happy about that, and they will want you to send a separate invoice with the VAT, or they would want you to resend your initial invoice with the VAT portion clearly stated on the invoice on a separate line. What we recommend is simply selecting 0 and then save changes, and then now you just have your total invoice price at £2,000. And then when you do become VAT registered, you can come back to this invoice. Depending on what the client wants, you can create it into a draft again and then issue it, like resend it with the updated VAT amount, and it'll increase the price to £2,400 and outline that there was an extra £400 of VAT charged on the invoice. But that's essentially creating an invoice. Very simple. It will automatically have all your details on here once it's been added into FreeAgent. So like the VAT number, I'll make sure to add it into FreeAgent for you, and then it'll be listed on the invoice automatically here. Your payment details, so once you have the business bank account set up, will be listed here. And then you can simply, when you want to send this invoice, you can either save it as a PDF and email it yourself, or you can click on this send by email button next to it. And that's basically how to create an invoice on FreeAgent. It's very straightforward. And just a note to make, when you are actually creating your invoices and you didn't physically email it to anyone through FreeAgent, you just saved it for your own records and then sent it by email yourself, you will want to make sure that you click on this mark as sent button, because this will create an active invoice which will be added in to your company's total income. And since most companies use invoice basis for their accounting method, it means anytime you send an invoice is when it's accounted for as income. And now if we go back to the overview page, we can actually see our invoice is listed here on the invoice timeline. And you can also see our income here has increased by £2,000. So now we have an operating profit, and there we have the corporation tax that's been calculated from that profit. And now the remaining figure is what we can take as dividends after all taxes have been accounted for. So I'd be quite happy to withdraw £1,500 as my dividend and not have any issue making sure the tax is actually paid. So this is why FreeAgent is really handy in this way. But of course, if you've got expenses to add still after creating your invoice, make sure you update those first, because it will change this carried forward balance, and that means the dividend figure will change as well. And that's a quick overview of creating your invoices and seeing how it affects the actual account